without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the speaker who's here to talk about the rebundling of event tech, how to reduce cost and operational overhead. Jonathan Kazarian, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm John Kazarian. I am the CEO and founder of Excel Events. As she mentioned, we're going to be talking about the rebundling of event tech, but a little bit broader than that is this concept of the rebundling of B2B tech in general. And then with that, we'll start to think about a little bit of a framework for how to actually go about buying event tech and what matters in that process. So there's a great quote from the CEO of Netscape, which was one of the first recognitions of the way that B2B tech goes through these cycles of unbundling and then rebundling. And this is particularly interesting because it's coming from the early 90s. And if we look back at some of the different ways that we've actually seen that transpire in some of our day-to-day lives, look at the music industry, for example, right? We used to buy CDs, there'd be 12 albums on a track. Then we went to the world of iTunes, you could buy a single song at a time. And now we're back to this subscription model where you're buying a bundle, you're buying a Spotify subscription, you're getting all of that at once. We've seen the same in the telecom space. We used to have landline phones, then we went out and bought cell phones. 2 different subscriptions, but again, it all comes back under one bundle. Again and again, right? Venmo, now all the banks have Zeal or Zelle. Uber is probably my favorite example though, where you've got this meshing of the benefits really of having that delivery network, and now you've got food delivery and human transport all in the same marketplace or environment. And really what's happening here is as new technology comes to light, those products are what create the unbundling experience that we've seen. And in the world of event tech, what we've really seen over the past 3 years, we've had something north of 250 different event tech entrants come into the market over the past 3 years. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the 4 major criteria that go into the buying process. And this also actually gets into a little bit of why I started Excel Events, and I'll share that story too. But it really comes down to these 4 major criteria. Is the price within what I can afford, what my company can support? Is the support there? Does it have the actual functionality I need? And is it going to deliver a UX that I want to put forward for my attendee base? And 9 years ago, when I started Excel Events, the reason was that I had a cousin who at the age of 17, she got diagnosed with cancer, and I wanted to do something for her. So I was living in Boston at the time, I ended up renting out the aquarium in Boston, and I hosted an 840-person event to raise money for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. But going into that event, I was trying to find solutions to help me run the event, technology solutions, and there just wasn't anything out there that was either affordable or that had decent support, especially on weekends, or had an experience that was something I wanted to put forward in front of my attendees. And that ultimately led to me starting Excel Events with that in mind, right? You really can find the big 4 and it's out there. Now, in order to get all of those elements, what we're finding today is that organizers are having to bundle together way too much tech. There was a great report that came out from Forrester just a couple of months ago, and it recognized that 19% of marketers are now managing 4 to 7 event technology solutions. That's 4 to 7 times the cost that they should be having to spend. It's 4 to 7 times the data silos, 4 to 7 times the overlapping functionality, right? Every event solution has to have some way of keeping track of registrants. So you just have this immense amount of overlap that gets created when you have this breadth of different solutions. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of incredible vendors here. I'm going to keep hitting on this some point. The ecosystem is strong, it will stay strong, but it doesn't mean you have to integrate everything at once, and you shouldn't be forced to. So let's talk about the unbundling of tech and event tech in particular. So we talked about the way that new entrants enter the space. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but we know that this happened so much over the past 3 years, particularly with virtual events, right? We learned all the things that technology can do to support events in ways that we hadn't really considered. We realized what the user experience can be. We realized what data is actually available to us. And it put us in a position where you basically couldn't say no to adopting some of these other solutions. Now, another trend that we see is, and this is particular to the event tech space, but certainly in B2B SaaS across the board, is that you have these platform companies where they're the heart of all of the data. They're where these ecosystem providers, these best-of-breed niche solutions bolt onto. And what happens is that they push this app ecosystem, and that's good and well, and it opens up the door for more tech to come in. But often it's an excuse to shift budget away from R&D and move that money to sales and marketing. And what happens as a result of that is you have these companies that could be providing a broader solution and giving you more flexibility, but they're not, because frankly, it's not in their best interest to do so. They want to focus on building the business at the core. And we'll talk about some of the implications of that in a moment. Now, another reason that we have this unbundling is that once platforms hit a certain scale, you do have tech debt, you have a broad customer base, it becomes much harder to innovate. That's nothing new, right? We know that, and that's what opens doors. That's where the startup ecosystem comes from. The other thing that's really facilitated this unbundling is the role of marketing ops, right? A term that wasn't used 10 years ago is since shifted even into revenue ops, but it's created an environment where buyers of these solutions, the people that are organizing events, demand gen teams, etc., are able to say, hey, we really want to use that solution because we know this marketing ops team is going to be able to figure out how to make that happen. But what it really does is it transfers the tech debt from the platform company over to yourselves, over to the buyers of that technology, because they end up in a position where they're ultimately the ones that are responsible for making sure everything is connected. But that doesn't last forever. And we found this out over the past 9 months where we've had immense layoffs, particularly in tech. It means that we've seen significant reductions in teams, and often ops teams are hit first because they're considered a cost center, not a revenue driver for organizations. So all of that tech debt then really starts to bubble up. So that's one of the major drivers of the rebundling that we're seeing today. It's the administrative complexity that comes out of all of these different tools coming together. It's also the data fragmentation. I mentioned before that with registration solutions, well, registration is ultimately at the core of every solution, or at least some mechanism for tracking attendees. And then you have this issue where you can't integrate all of these different solutions into your other stack. Maybe it's HubSpot, maybe it's Salesforce, because you don't have a consistent data model across the board. Another aspect of what's driving the rebundling is that attendee experience. Now, I don't mean to pick on this event, but here, I think there's 3 or 4 different technology solutions that we're all using, from lead capture to registration to badge printing to the hosted buyer program meetings. It's all different logins, right? If you have to make an adjustment, data's not pushing in real time. And ultimately, that has a bearing not just on the event organizers, but on all of us. I mean, I know I spent probably 15 minutes trying to navigate different solutions to log into, and this happens at every event I go to. So the rebundling is also driven by that continued focus on the attendee experience. And ultimately, what's that trade-off between the best-of-breed solution that may be able to facilitate one aspect of our experience slightly better versus ensuring that everybody is able to access the entirety of that experience? Now, another thing that we're seeing today is there's just this general market fear around the financial stability of niche solutions. When you want to go and use that best-of-breed solution because it is doing something that's incredibly cool and innovative, you don't know if that's going to be around. So you're hesitant to make the investment because it is a soft cost on your ops team to be able to integrate that. And I think one of the reasons that there's increased uncertainty with those solutions is the episodic nature of events. A lot of event technology is not purchased on an annual or subscription basis, right? It's very episodic in nature. And that does make it harder financially for companies to be able to facilitate financial stability. Now, we're also seeing budget cuts as another driver, which, again, when you're told that you can't go out and buy 4 solutions, you're going to inevitably look for one platform that can cover 80% of what you need. Again, it may not be the best of breed with something like surveys, but it gets the job done and allows you to ultimately focus on that experience for your attendees. And then the final thing is implementation flexibility. So I mentioned the concept of the app ecosystem, the app environment out there, and again, the ability to use all of those best-of-breed solutions that we're surrounded by here today. But you should be able to do that on your own timeline. And when you implement a platform that does give you the breadth of features, because they're focused on R&D instead of being focused on just sales and marketing, what that means is that you can implement that solution, focus on one implementation, ensure that all of the data is flowing where it needs to flow, and then over time, and as you learn from one event to the next, you can figure out, okay, maybe that solution, they're not investing too heavily in one particular feature. We know this is an area that we need to expand on, and you can go out and find that best-of-breed solution and integrate it again on your timeline. So it creates a lot of flexibility for organizations. Now, as you think about looking for that platform solution, there's 4 things that I would encourage you to keep in mind. What is the API and webhook availability to you so that you can build upon the solution? Is it well documented, and are they actually supporting it? Next is the comprehension of the knowledge base itself. Just last week, we use Intercom as our chat support tool. We have 24/7 support. Our median response time is 23 seconds, and that's with real people, but it's not going to be like that forever. And just last week, I got an email from Intercom that on how to basically optimize your knowledge base so that these AI chat widgets are going to be available to help support your customers 24/7 in real time. And what we're going to see in event tech and across the board is that companies that are still using human support for everything are going to have to keep their prices higher. There's going to be a price reduction when all of that money doesn't have to be spent on support, and companies can refocus on R&D. So making sure that the knowledge base is there is critical because you want to make sure that company is going to evolve. Now, another concept is this of crafted, not cobbled. This is language that I grabbed from HubSpot, and I completely resonate with it. But it's the idea that the platform that you're building upon is growing organically over time. They're identifying the areas that they want to invest in, and they're building that in-house on the same tech stack. There's other companies, and this tends to happen when private equity gets involved, that come in and they want to do a roll-up. They want to buy different tech stacks, and they want to put them together. But what happens is you create these data silos, and that's ultimately where the shared data model comes into play. When you have a company that's completely focused on ensuring that everything is built on the same base, it means that you're not going to have a situation where somebody updates their name in the registration software and they go to print their badge and it's not updated there. It also means that you're going to have a much better experience as it comes to pushing that data to the rest of your tech stack. So for example, Accelevents, we actually announced an acquisition yesterday of a company called High Attendance. And as we bring that platform into our ecosystem, we're actually not incorporating any of their code. We're going to shut down the entirety of that code base. But before we do so, we're going to identify, okay, what are the things that they're doing really well, and how can we build that into our stack? And that is ultimately the crafted approach to thinking about product management and how you can make sure that that experience for your attendees, for your event organizers, your staff, your exhibitors, your speakers is completely consistent across the board. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I see when it comes to organizations buying event tech is that they underestimate the importance of the registration functionality. And as we think about that, there's ultimately 4 levels of registration functionality that you should be considering. Before I touch on those, I want to hit on some of the reasons that this is so critical. Again, at the center of the entire event tech ecosystem is that attendee record. And when you're not putting that at the center and you're trying to connect different tools together that have siloed components of that information, you're ultimately creating an experience that is inconsistent across the board. So level 1, basic registration. You don't really need an event tech provider. You've got something like a Google form or maybe a form from your CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce, etc. Next step is when you start to think about payment processing and having a level of reporting there. We often see companies looking to still do that sort of in-house with maybe a WordPress plugin or a ticketing software, sort of, again, differentiating ticketing from registration. Level 3 is when we start to get more advanced. We're thinking about ticket bundles, the ability for somebody to register themselves and some of their colleagues at the same time, the ability to add add-ons or hotel bookings into the checkout process, the ability to facilitate conditional logic to capture additional information, and then getting a little bit into that check-in experience and QR code scanning. Now, I mentioned the QR code scanning as opposed to the badge printing because when it comes to the QR code scanning, there's not another layer of data that needs to be updated on site. And what we're seeing often today is that there's not that many companies out there that do badge printing and kiosk mode for on-site. So you're seeing this breadth of registration platforms getting attached to some sort of kiosk and badge printing solution. And again, that's where we see the lines, that's where we see the problems on-site because data always needs to get updated. And then level 4 is when you start to get into a true conference and trade show management solution. Here we're talking about things like approval workflows. Maybe that's session or poster presentation approvals. Could be speaker or exhibitor approvals, or it could even be approval for attendees. We also have multiple buyer journeys. There may be a separate buyer journey for VIP attendees versus general admin or free attendees. We're also talking about offline payment tracking, which is huge with associations that may have attendees paying with purchase orders. We've already talked a bit about the badge printing and kiosk side of things, and then the lead retrieval or lead capture, where that centralized registration database is again at the core of that entire attendee experience. Now, I just want to share an observation that we've seen at Excel events. The first chart here is from Q2 of last year. So about a year ago. And at that point in time, our enterprise deals, so customers that were paying over $25K a year, 59% of them had marketing ops involved in the sales process. Today, or in Q1, that number was up to 91%. So what that's telling me is that companies are thinking about their event tech buying process much more holistically and thinking about incorporating where is this data going to flow. Some of the reasons I think that's happening is the focus on first-party data with the third-party cookie reductions. But also, what that wave we saw over the past 2 years of companies adding another vendor every day to their tech stack and hitting that point of tech debt. It was basically being forced on the hand of marketing ops, and now they want to be just much more intentional about what that tech stack looks like and the expandability of the tech stack. We also see conversations around APIs and webhooks pretty much in every one of those meetings now. Now, in closing, I want to reiterate, again, tap the ecosystem. No platform that is focused on doing everything is going to be best at anything. But you should still think about your buying process from ensuring that you have what you need to get started on day one, because it's far easier to implement one solution than it is to be in a position where you're implementing the platform and having to facilitate adding 4 or 5 other vendors on at the same time and bringing in all of the resources to do so when you don't even know the entirety of what you need yet. Often, that solution that's 80% of the way there is going to be sufficient for what you need. And as you run more events, you expand your event programming, you're going to learn where those gaps are and where you need to fill them in. That's all I have for us today. I post on LinkedIn pretty regularly, about 3 times a week. If anybody wants to follow me, this QR code will take you directly to my LinkedIn page. We also have a booth over in the corner. Again, I'm with Excel Events. We are all-in-one event management platform. Any questions that I can answer?
Do we have any questions in the audience? No. John, thank you so... Oh, okay. Last minute one here. Here we go.
Hi, I attended it a little later, but whatever you said was very relevant. Are the buyers, the users of this technology, are they becoming aware of what you are bringing to them? I mean, which are the sectors that are driving the growth of what you have to offer?
Yeah, so multiple sectors for different reasons. So tech, for example, there's been, obviously significant layoffs in tech and significant cost reductions. So tech is very cost focused right now. Some other call it manufacturing, some other verticals that might not have the same internal tech resources are more focused on having that all-in-one solution because they don't have the capacity to expand their stack as easily.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, John.